Dihydrogen monoxide, or H2O, a popular molecule comprised of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom, covers about 71% of the Earth's surface, mostly in seas and oceans. Now, dihydrogen monoxide can be a solid as ice, a liquid, or in a gas form as steam or vapor. Approximately 70% of the fresh H2O used by humans goes to agriculture. It's an excellent solvent for a wide variety of substances, both mineral and organic, and such is widely used in industrial processes and in cooking and washing. At a pressure of 1 atmosphere, pure H2O freezes at 0 degrees Celsius and it boils or vaporizes at 100 degrees Celsius. Pure H2O is tasteless. It's the added minerals and dissolved substances that give it its flavor. Now, dihydrogen monoxide is no joke. It can kill you if you drink too much or try to breathe it in, so try not to do that. The human body can last several weeks without food, but only a few days without H2O, which makes up somewhere between 50 and 75% of your body. Generally, an adult human needs somewhere between 2 to 3 quarts of this stuff per day. We lose it through our breath, through perspiration, urine, bowel movements. So it's important to continue to replenish H2O throughout the day. The dihydrogen monoxide that flows through American kitchen faucets is filled with organic and inorganic substances, but it's generally clean, clear, and safe. Public systems are monitored for harmful substances like bacteria, viruses, pesticides, petroleum products, acids, and some metals. More recently, chemicals from drugs, perfumes, sunscreens, things that wash off people's skin may slip by filtration systems and end up in what we drink. The truth is, we may not know the consequences of any of these chemical substances and how they affect our health until it's too late. Oh, the dihydrogen monoxide, the H2O we're talking about? Yes, it's water. America is still struggling with a dangerous divide between those who have access to safe and affordable drinking water and those who don't. Let's look at all the potential problems with the water that comes into our homes and what you can do to protect yourself and your loved ones, just in case we find out in 20 years that this stuff is really bad for you.
Number 1, PFAS. In 2014, residents of Horsham Township near Philadelphia, my hometown, learned that their water had been contaminated with potentially toxic chemicals linked to an array of health problems, including learning delays in children and cancer. So they sued the government. A colon cancer diagnosis at age 30 came as a complete shock to a Satellite Beach, Florida radiation oncologist, actually a couple of minutes from where I live now, who knew from experience such cancer rarely strikes people under 40. Her news arrived just 10 months after her best friend, a fellow high school graduate, lost her battle with breast cancer. Then she heard at least 20 others from her high school alumni had been diagnosed with cancer within a few years of each other. Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune. You've probably heard about this. It's a 246 square mile U.S. military training facility in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Between 1953 and 1987, 2 base wells supplied contaminated drinking water to children and military families, to the base hospital, and to workers in their place of employment. These chemicals were known to cause 15 different illnesses and medical conditions, including several types of cancer, reproductive problems, birth defects, and even Parkinson's disease. The suspect in all 3 of these cases and more is a local military base dumping a concoction of toxic chemicals over decades that are now lurking underground in water tables or in the lakes and lagoons where kids play and fish. In all 3 cases, state and federal authorities are working to determine if the cancers are truly linked or if it's just some weird coincidence. But with 3 separate but very similar incidences, I'm thinking the coincidence excuse is probably off the table, boys. Experts suspect fire-extinguishing foams containing fire retardant PFAS used and dumped on the bases could have infiltrated the local water. PFAS is short for per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, big words, a chemical class that includes approximately 5,000 compounds that have been linked to cancer and learning delays in children. used in numerous consumer products. That's right. The compounds are known as forever chemicals because the bonds that hold these PFAS together don't break down easily in the environment. PFAS were first developed in the 1940s and are used in many products across all industries because of their grease, water, and oil repellent properties, best known for their original use in the fluoropolymer Teflon and the stain-resistant coating Scotchgard. These chemicals are now used in a wide range of consumer and industrial products, including clothing, furniture, carpeting, food packaging, non-stick cookware, cosmetics, and, of course, firefighting film-forming foam. Like petroleum and dry cleaning solvent plumes, the compounds can migrate long distances in soils and can turn up in groundwater at thousands of times the federal government's current lifetime health advisory level for drinking water. And once these compounds are inside our bodies, they don't break down. They're forever chemicals, remember that, and our bodies don't know how to get rid of them. So these compounds build up in your body over time. The many ways they can enter the body complicates pinning down a smoking gun exposure. They can include drinking water or air or dust or consumer products, foods such as fish or shellfish, or food packaged in materials containing the compounds, such as popcorn, pizza boxes, and fast food containers. Guilty as charged. People also get exposed by touching carpets and other surfaces treated with the stain-proofing compounds. According to the CDC, scientific studies have shown that exposures to PFAS like PFOA or PFO or PFOS can be harmful to humans and animals. Some of the health risks include developmental effects to fetuses during pregnancy or to breastfed infants, including low birth weight, accelerated puberty, or skeletal variations, testicular or kidney cancer, liver damage, immune effects, including decreased antibody production and immunity, thyroid and cholesterol changes, and usually not the good ones. But one of the most troubling routes to PFAS exposure is the drinking water that's been contaminated by discharges from factories and other facilities. Researchers at Oregon State University found PFAS compounds in groundwater below 2 military bases years after the military stopped using firefighting foam there. The Food and Drug Administration, which regulates bottled water in the U.S., has not yet set official limits on PFAS in bottled water. The Environmental Protection Agency, which regulates tap water, also has yet to set standards regarding PFAS, but it has issued voluntary guidance calling on water utilities to limit the presence of PFAS to 70 parts per trillion. For context, 1 part per trillion is equivalent to 1 grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming pool filled with sand. Advocates and researchers support a 1 part per trillion. That's a 1 part per trillion limit for PFAS in drinking water, citing growing research linking even very small amounts to potential harm, not to mention the compound's persistence in the environment. Honestly, at this point, a PFAS limit of 1 part per trillion is probably unrealistic. Unfortunately, the damage has been done, and PFAS is very difficult to eliminate altogether without drastic and expensive environmental measures that most folks won't want to pay higher taxes to achieve. In the meantime, we're basically on our own and left with the responsibility of filtering PFAS from our own water. And more on that later. The Horsham Township couple we talked about a little earlier alleged the Navy dumped thousands of gallons of firefighting foam, which contains PFAS, at their local base during exercises over many years. The couple claimed the tests of their private well found PFOA and PFOS levels of 298 parts per trillion and 701 parts per trillion, respectively. That's up to 10 times the EPA's voluntary limit. The Flint, Michigan water drinking crisis is yet another example of the dangers of PFOS and PFOA polluting drinking water. At its peak, in addition to the ridiculously high levels of lead and bacteria, drinking water sources contained up to 1,309 parts per trillion levels of PFOA and 410 parts per trillion of PFOS. Now, a few states have set PFAS limits below the EPA's 70 parts per trillion advisory. Vermont, set a 20 parts per trillion limit for 5 PFAS compounds combined, while New Hampshire passed a 12 part per trillion limit on PFOA and a 15 parts per trillion limit on PFOS. Other states have proposed PFAS standards. Our home state of Florida set a combined PFAS and PFOS advisory level of 0.07 micrograms per liter, which is a very misleading way to state that Florida doesn't think PFAS is a big problem. In parts per trillion, that 0.07 micrograms per liter calculates to 70,000 parts per trillion. That's only 1,000 times more than the EPA's safe level advisory. If you get your tap water through a public water system, you can request an annual report detailing local PFAS levels. Consumers can take some steps to limit their exposure to PFAS, including testing their home water, filtering your water, choosing bottled waters carefully, and avoiding products that contain the compounds. Consider choosing flooring and furniture brands that don't use a stain-resistant or water-resistant coating. Check your fast food packaging and microwave popcorn bags or other common sources. And also be careful when cooking with non-stick pans. They shouldn't shed PFAS when used according to manufacturer specifications, but don't overheat them or scrape them excessively with metal utensils or put them in a dishwasher if they're not meant to be cleaned. Many consumers turn to bottled water when unsure about the safety of their tap water, but even some bottled water products sold in the U.S. and tested as part of a new study contain potentially toxic PFAS chemicals, prompting calls for the federal government to set standards covering the chemicals. A recent study, published in the journal Water Research and led by Johns Hopkins University researchers, detected PFAS substances in 39 out of more than 100 bottled waters tested, in some cases at levels deemed concerning by water quality experts. The study did not identify which brands were tested, but the researchers did find that bottled waters labeled as purified, which are typically filtered through reverse osmosis, contain less PFAS overall than spring water, which is not filtered using that method. In 2020, Consumer Reports tested 47 bottled waters and detected PFAS in 43 of them. Carbonated waters were more likely to contain PFAS, with several showing levels above the scientists' recommended 1 part per trillion limit. Plus, BPS, the bisphenol S, leaches into the water from plastic bottles. We'll talk about that later in this video, not to mention a tremendous amount of unrecycled trash that further pollutes water supplies. So apparently bottled water is not the solution to anything, really. You can test your own city or well water for PFAS with a tap score test. We have the links in the comments below.
Chloramines and TTHMs. Water comes from a variety of sources, such as lakes and wells, which can be contaminated with germs that may cause infectious diseases like typhoid fever, hepatitis, and cholera. Germs can also contaminate water as it travels through miles of piping to get to your community. So to prevent this contamination with germs, water companies add a disinfectant, usually either chlorine or chloramine, that kill disease-causing germs such as salmonella and norovirus.
Back in 1974, scientists discovered that chlorine could react with naturally occurring materials in the water to create what are called disinfection byproducts, or DBPs. These are the substances that form when the disinfectant reacts with the natural compounds in the water. Many of these DBPs have been shown to cause cancer, including trihalomethanes, TTHMs, which are a group of chemical compounds. Today, we have more than 1,000 U.S. cities with unsafe levels of total THMs. They call them TTHMs in their water. They're colorless and they evaporate out of the water into the air, so inhalation exposure to TTHM can be significant, especially when showering and bathing, as can exposure from absorption through the skin. No, water isn't absorbed into your body through your skin, but the metals and minerals and pollutants in the water can actually be absorbed through the skin. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the EPA have determined that TTHMs may be carcinogenic to humans. Long-term consumption of TTHM in drinking water above safe limits It will increase the risk of certain types of bladder, colon, and rectal cancer. Some data indicate that the disinfection byproducts may increase the risk of developmental effects. So, women who are pregnant or may become pregnant may wish to avoid consuming water containing TTHM and other disinfection byproducts exceeding the drinking water standard. More research is being conducted to better understand the potential risks from using water containing TTHM. Many water treatment facilities have been switching from chlorine to chloramines, largely to help public water systems meet federal disinfection byproduct requirements. Now, these chloramines are a mixture of chlorine and ammonia. Because chloramine is more stable and longer lasting than free chlorine, it provides better protection against bacterial growth in water distribution systems. According to the Water Quality Association, some byproducts from chloramine are suspected carcinogens. However, the Center for Disease Control states on their website that chloramine creates fewer DBPs than chlorine. Chloramine has been used as a drinking water disinfectant in the United States since 1929. In 1998, an EPA survey estimated 68 million Americans were drinking water disinfected with chloramine. Several major U.S. cities such as Philadelphia, San Francisco, Tampa Bay, and Washington, D.C. use chloramine to disinfect drinking water. Chloramine is recognized as a safe disinfectant and a good alternative to chlorine. Studies indicate that using drinking water with small amounts of chloramine does not cause harmful health effects and provides protection against waterborne disease outbreaks. These studies reported no observed health effects from drinking water with chloramine levels of less than 50 milligrams per liter in drinking water. A normal level for drinking water disinfection can range from 1 to 4 milligrams per liter. Unlike chlorine, chloramine cannot be removed by letting water sit out for a couple of days. It's more stable than chlorine. However, products and filters are available that can remove chloramine. Some water treatment plants switch back and forth between chlorine and chloramines at different times of the year to flush their systems, causing something called a burnout. A burnout happens when the water treatment process changes from chloramines to free chlorine, which is a stronger, faster-acting disinfectant. During these burnout things, the chlorine can form potentially dangerous DBPs, which are then passed on to your drinking water. Some burnouts can last up to 90 days. Municipal water treatment plants are not required to advise you when this happens. One of the most famous cases of chloramines gone wrong was when Washington, D.C. switched to using chloramines in 2000, which led to major corrosion issues in the city's aging lead pipes. By 2001, lead levels were detected to be at least 80 times higher than the accepted safe limits. A congressional investigation and lawsuit followed. To reduce your overall TTHM exposure risk, reduce the length of showers and baths. Ventilate your bathroom while bathing or showering. Limit the time spent in or around chlorinated pools or hot tubs. Operate room exhaust fans or ventilate your room when boiling water, washing with hot water, or even running the dishwasher. Reduce the temperature on hot water heaters. We'll talk about filtering water shortly.
Heavy metals. In recent years, the onset of the Flint, Michigan drinking water crisis has made people aware of heavy metals in tap water, and especially lead. Many of these naturally occurring and potentially toxic metals cannot be smelled, tasted, or seen in drinking water. But once you're in your body, they can bioaccumulate, leading to detrimental health impacts, especially in your brain and nervous system. Remember that boiling water will not remove lead or any other metals. Boiling will remove only the water, concentrate the contamination, and make it even worse.
Lead is a bluish-silver naturally occurring metal that's fairly soft and very resistant to corrosion, making it a plumber's favorite material back in the day. It is toxic to just about every life form. It can enter your tap water when household plumbing systems corrode, when natural deposits erode into your water source, or when industrial activity leaks lead into your water source. While the EPA enforces a 15 part per billion limit on lead in drinking water. No amount of lead is considered safe. Lead will accumulate in your body, and it has several toxic effects on your brain, liver, kidney, and bones. Children are especially vulnerable to the damaging effects of lead poisoning. Lead exposure can lower a child's IQ, negatively impact behavior, and result in lifelong disability. Currently, there is no federal requirement for schools to test their drinking water, leaving millions of children exposed to potentially toxic levels of lead in water. You cannot see, taste, or smell lead in your water. If you live in an older neighborhood or a house built prior to 1986, laboratory testing is a wise investment. It's important to note that lead is legal in many fixtures and pipes since it's usually covered with something called biofilm, which is like this slime that separates your water from the lead, which is kind of gross when you think about it, but it's definitely safer. Now, these routine municipal chlorine burnouts can kill that biofilm, exposing your water to the lead underneath, and that's the problem with burnouts. So the only way to know if your water has lead is to test your water with a professional laboratory like TapScore. Cast into the spotlight by Erin Brockovich and the super popular movie about her class action lawsuit, chromium occurs in natural deposits and can leach into water systems through mining and industrial waste. The most common forms of chromium that occur in natural waters in the environment are trivalent chromium, which is an essential nutrient found in broccoli, liver, potatoes, whole grains, seafood, and some other meats. It's actually good for you. And then there's hexavalent chromium, the bad chromium, which is a human carcinogen that can also affect your liver, kidneys, and cause circulatory disorders and nerve damage. The National Drinking Water Standard is set for total chromium. Both hexavalent and trivalent chromium are covered under the same exact water standard because chromium may actually convert from trivalent to hexavalent in the water and in the human body depending on environmental conditions. So the EPA currently limits total chromium at 100 parts per billion. Chromium cannot be seen, tasted, or smelled, so knowing if it's in your drinking water is near impossible if you haven't tested it. But if you live in an industrial area with a lot of big factories that are still operating, you definitely want to get your water tested. Manganese is a naturally occurring metal used in corrosion-resistant aluminum alloys. It's also an additive in unleaded gasoline, paint pigment, batteries, matches, fireworks, fertilizer, and a component of tobacco smoke. While manganese is an essential nutrient required by the human body in small amounts, exposure to high concentrations over many years has been associated with toxicity to the nervous system. The EPA recommends maintaining a manganese concentration at or below 50 parts per billion in drinking water. Now with this, you may notice a metallic taste, a brownish red color that can stain your clothing or appliances, or black slime if your water contains manganese at concentrations at over 50 parts per billion. Copper seldom occurs naturally in the water supply, but is also one of the most commonly detected heavy metals in tap water. Corrosion of old pipes, faucets, and other plumbing fixtures is the most common source of copper in American homes. Changes in water chemistry can dissolve these metals from old pipes and deposit them in your drinking water. Running your water for a minute before drinking can usually reduce copper buildup at your tap. Now, small amounts of copper are necessary for our health, and the EPA has set a health goal of 1.3 parts per million. Above 1 part per million, copper can cause a distasteful metallic flavor in your water and leave those blue-green stains on fixtures you've probably seen at playgrounds and water fountains. Too much copper, especially in kids, can cause vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach cramps. Copper has also been associated with liver and kidney disease. Nickel, just like the coin, is a naturally occurring element and is most often exposed to drinking water during mining activities. Currently, there are no EPA-enforced limits on nickel levels in drinking water. Nickel was regulated from 1992 until 1995 with a level set at 100 parts per billion, but the EPA removed the limits when the Nickel Development Institute, challenged the methodology used to establish the maximum contaminant level in a petition to the U.S. Court of Appeals, so that went away. Nickel can be a potential human carcinogen at high doses. In lower doses, it can lead to decreased lung function and allergic reaction. Now, nickel doesn't always make itself easily known. The most frequent concern regarding nickel in water is skin irritation in showers or baths. About 10 to 20% of the U.S. population is sensitive to nickel and may experience a rash or other dermal irritation after having contact with water that contains too much nickel. Aluminum can infiltrate water sources from natural formations underground or after use as a water treatment coagulant and additive. It may also be released by metal refineries and mining operations. The federal secondary maximum contaminant level for aluminum is set between 50 to 200 parts per billion. While elevated levels of aluminum may result in bluish-tinged water, concentrations of aluminum may be high without presenting any visible effects. Aluminum is a known nervous system toxicant with possible links to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Arsenic is a common element that's toxic to humans. Natural erosion of arsenic from soil and rocks is the most common pathway for arsenic to get into your tap water. It's also present in agricultural runoff from some farms and waste streams from metals and electronics industry activities. The EPA recommends a maximum contaminant level for arsenic of no more than 10 parts per billion. However, a recent study demonstrated that children drinking well water with levels as low as 5 parts per billion of arsenic had significant reductions in IQ and perceptual reasoning. Short-term effects of arsenic exposure include skin discoloration, stomach pain, nausea and vomiting, and diarrhea. Long-term effects include impacts to the heart, lung, liver, kidney, eye, dermal, gastrointestinal, immune system, nervous system, and diabetes and various types of cancer. So arsenic is a pretty bad thing. You definitely don't want that in your water. There are no obvious signs of arsenic contamination. However, a Natural Resources Defense Council study reported that nearly 77 million Americans receive drinking water from systems that violate federal regulations for arsenic. They also noted that Western states tend to have a higher incidence and elevated average levels of arsenic in their municipal or well water systems. Now again, this company, TabScore, offers a water test designed explicitly for testing these and other important U.S. water contaminants that pose potential health risks. Whether you're on city water or private well water, all of TabScore's essential advanced and extended tests include high-precision analysis for every heavy metal. And again, that link is in the comments below.
Plastics. Remember those micro beads, those tiny beads found in face washes and toothpaste a few years back? Those are perfect examples of microplastics. They're tiny pieces of plastic measuring fewer than 5 millimeters in length. Very, very small. It's about the size of a sesame seed. And they can be smaller than a period at the end of a magazine sentence. Most of the plastic waste in the ocean is not visible on the surface, but rather hidden as microplastics, barely visible in the ocean, also in fish and in our drinking water. Unfortunately, plastic waste doesn't disappear. It only breaks down into smaller pieces of itself, eventually small enough to migrate through our intestinal walls and travel to our lymph nodes and other bodily organs where they can potentially cause health troubles. Plastic can carry toxic chemicals and then release them later on, exposing us to harmful chemicals. Some of these toxic chemicals can include heavy metals, dioxins, or bisphenol S, which can cause havoc in our bodies in higher concentrations.
A global survey of tap water from 6 regions on 5 continents with 159 samples analyzed found 83% of those samples contained plastic particles. The range was between 0 and 57 particles per liter. The highest density of plastic per volume of tap water was found in North America, and the lowest densities were found collectively in 7 European countries. In the U.S. alone, up to 94% of drinking water samples were found to contain microplastics. Sadly, microplastics were even found in bottled water, including some of the most popular brands. Now, in our current environment, we may consume as many as 14 microplastic particles a day, typically as microscopic strands or threads of plastic that you can barely see from drinking water or eating seafood. And unfortunately, we're not yet sure what that's doing to our bodies. As microplastics are a relatively recent field of study, the effects of microplastics on human health remain largely unknown. Most research has been conducted on the effects of ingesting plastic in wildlife populations, but similar research is just now beginning with humans. 5. Drugs. Tiny amounts of pharmaceuticals, including antibiotics, hormones, mood stabilizers, and other drugs, are now in our drinking water supplies, according to an investigation by the Associated Press. Drinking water supplies in 24 major metropolitan areas were found to include drugs. At this point, there's really no physical hard evidence of pharmaceutical and personal care products in the water harming people, but studies are showing adverse effects on aquatic life. Data collected from a medication collection program in California back in 2007 suggests that about half of all medications, both prescription and over-the-counter, were discarded. Our bodies metabolize only a fraction of most drugs we swallow. Most of the remainder is excreted in urine or feces and gets into the wastewater. An increasing number of medications are applied as creams or lotions, and the unabsorbed portions of those medications can contribute to the pollution problem when they get washed off. It's been calculated, for example, that one man's use of testosterone cream can wind up putting as much of the hormone into the water as the natural excretions from hundreds of men. A separate study in 1999 and 2000 found measurable amounts of one or more medications in 80% of the water samples drawn from a network of 139 streams in 30 states. Those drugs include antibiotics, antidepressants, blood thinners, heart medications, synthetic hormones, and painkillers. Fortunately, these were found only in trace amounts and far below levels thought to have an effect on humans. Agriculture, another major source of drugs seeping into water supplies. The 2 trillion pounds of animal waste generated by large-scale poultry and livestock operations in this country is laced with hormones and antibiotics fed to animals to make them grow faster and keep them from getting sick. Inevitably, some of those hormones and antibiotics leach into the groundwater or get into your waterways somehow. Most sewage or drinking water treatment plants are not currently designed to remove pharmaceuticals from the water. What we're not sure of is the cumulative effect of even tiny amounts of these and other pharmaceuticals in our drinking water, because there hasn't been enough time to study the effects. Right now, the EPA does not have any guidelines for pharmaceuticals in drinking water. Water treatment plants, despite removing most compounds, don't specifically test or treat for them. And as our demographic ages, drug use will continue to climb. Newer pharmaceutical innovations, including nanomedicines, will continue to find their way past filters and into our water systems. And we honestly have no idea how any of those will affect the rest of us.
Filtering your own water to be safe. With all the potential dangerous variables and unstudied effects of these chemicals, metals, and plastics in our water supplies, the only way to ensure that you and your loved ones are safe is to test and filter your own drinking water. There are dozens of consumer water filters on the market made by companies like Brita, Pure, and others. So let's look at some of our favorite affordable options to make sure we're not drinking anything we shouldn't be.
Almost all newer refrigerators with connected water lines have some sort of water filtration system. They're cost-effective ways to get instantly cold filtered drinking water. Many of these filters use a 3-step filtration. Whirlpool Every Drop filters use a particle filter, where large particles such as sand and silt are trapped in a fine mesh net. Water is then pushed through something like activated charcoal, where particulate matter like sugars and cysts are filtered out. Gross, right? And a third filter traps microscopic substances like traces of pharmaceuticals and pesticides that may be left behind in treated water. The final step also improves the taste and odor of water. The biggest problem with refrigerator filters isn't the actual filter, but the dispenser itself. In 2013, the National Sanitation Foundation did a study on the germiest places in the kitchen and discovered that most refrigerator water dispensers are coated with concerning levels of yeast and mold. Make sure to look for a water filter that's NSF certified to ensure proper contaminant removal. Most refrigerator water filters last up to about 6 months, some up to a year in some places, depending on the quality of the water being filtered. However, some may need to be changed as often as every 3 months, like we do in Florida. Water filter pitchers. We've used Brita, Pure, and water drop filters. The thing is, we're not completely sure that any of these remove all the PFAS, TTHMs, heavy metals, plastics, and residual drugs from our tap water, the stuff we talked about earlier. Call us paranoid, but we've instituted a 2-stage filtration system for all the water we drink and cook with in our apartment. First, we use a water drop filter to filter our tap water. It's super fast, the filters last a long time, and it's been shown to remove chlorine and fluoride. After the water drop, we dump that pre-filtered water into our zero water filter that hopefully removes everything else we shouldn't be drinking. Our local water has very high dissolved solids, including metals and microplastics, so the pre-filter helps our zero water filters last a little longer. The bad news is our $15 zero water filters fail in a week with our TDS, our total dissolved solids, at 300 or higher. And then after they fail, they horribly expel all the bad stuff they filtered back into your glass. You'll know this because the water will taste sour and smell like dead fish. It's kind of gross. So you really need to monitor the TDS levels every day or every other day. Plus, the filter housing is unfortunately plastic. And it is what it is. If your water is bad, prepare to spend a small fortune in replacement filters. We've tested our zero water results, and we're pleased to know the metals, plastic, most of the PFAS and TTHMs were all removed successfully. Zero Water's ion exchange filter seems to be the only pour-through water that's NSF certified to reduce lead, chromium, and PFAS. Dissolved solids are a measurement of the compounds like mineral salts and organic compounds that are dissolved in the water through contact with rock and other surfaces. Now, the other water pitcher brands like Brita and Pure are good if you want to reduce bad-tasting chlorine and contaminants like heavy metals, but they really weren't designed to remove or reduce PFAS and their concentration in your tap water. We have a separate video with results in our zero water right here on this channel. Among others, Pure and Brita make popular models of faucet-mounted water filters that screw directly into your faucet and filter your water before you use it. The faucet-mount water filter is fairly easy to attach. It might look a little funny sticking out where it doesn't belong, but that's a small price to pay for clean water that'll keep you healthy. Faucet-mounted filters are compatible with most traditional kitchen faucets, but they don't work with the newer pull-out or handheld faucets. There are also reverse osmosis water filters that are located under the sink. According to the Environmental Working Group, a public health advocacy organization that has called for more regulation of PFAS, the gold standard for in-house filtration is a reverse osmosis filter, commonly called RO. Reverse osmosis filters work by forcing water through a membrane that traps contaminants. These filters are considered the most effective, but they do produce large amounts of wastewater, about 3 times as much water as they treat. Prices range somewhere between $200 to $1,800, but the RO system is typically the most expensive option and may require a professional plumber to install it under your sink to make sure it doesn't leak. Whole home RO filters are also available. Water Drop, same company makes the tabletop water filter, makes a popular and affordable under-sink RO system.
The only way to know what's in your water is to test your water. Are there contaminants in your drinking water? How do they affect your health? And what can you do about them? TapScore scientists have developed dozens of tests that can answer all your questions and more. In a separate video, we're going to show you the results of our own TapScore testing that we did right here in our own home.
So to be safe and not sorry, test your water and filter your water with at least one of these systems to make sure you're taking out at least some of the nastiness that's potentially harmful to your bodies that we don't know yet. But it's better to be safe than sorry. We've got links to a lot of the things we talked about today in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. Chuck Fresh from Give Them Well.